cover the history of radio all the way from the 1920s to the present. And our presenters are Richard Dennert of Clarkdale and Jackie Bessler, who I also believe lives here in the Verde Valley. So with that, Richard, I will let you take the presentation.
Well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. And thank you to the Clarkdale Historical Society and Museum for inviting us here today to make our presentation. Our history doesn't go back as long as some of the other presentations you've probably heard, but we'll begin early, well, almost 100 years ago, so I guess that makes it history. I want to thank Ruth for getting me involved with this, but I also, want to remind everybody, if Ruth calls you and says, would you like to do a presentation on something, be sure you remember what that thing is. Because I realized after I had agreed to do this, that I haven't been in the radio business for 30 years. So I'm fortunate to have my colleague Jackie Bessler with me. Jackie and I have known each other since he came to work in Cottonwood at KVRD in 1991. And so we've known each other a long time, and we work together, and he has much more information about the history of radio in the Verde Valley than I do, because most of it's happened in the last 30 years, the expansion that's gone on. So we're going to start at the beginning, and the first radio station that I can find in the Verde Valley was in Jerome, and it went on the air in 1928. It was on the air until 1944, and it was KCRJ AM. Now this logo kind of looks like a coverage map, but I'll guarantee you that an AM station at 1340 in Jerome did not cover from Winslow to Kingman. So it's an aspirational map, let's put it that way. We found some items that were associated with KCRJ on the internet. There's an Arizona Radio Museum that had a nice article on them. And you can see that just like most radio stations in those days, the day was kind of divided up into different programming segments. Of course, there was news. There was The Shadow. I don't know, some of you remember The Shadow, the radio program. When I first got into radio, my first job in Silver City, New Mexico, part of my job was to run the Shadow every afternoon. And we did Fibber McGee and Molly and The Shadow and all kinds of things like that. And apparently KCRJ in Jerome took advantage of that as well. It was it was presented by Bill Kuhn's service station, so it was sponsored, well worth doing. And then they had different parts of the day, different programs, different kinds of music, and that was fairly typical in those days. This is fairly typical of a broadcasting facility back in Jerome in the 20s and 30s. You needed a few pieces of equipment and a transmitter, and you could run open a radio station. I went, not only has it been 30 years since I was involved with the radio business, but it's been a long time since I've done any research and made a PowerPoint. So I have to thank Michael for putting my PowerPoint together for me. But we're going from ancient technology over here on this table, which we'll talk about a little bit, to I actually used artificial intelligence. I can't believe it. And I went to Gemini and I asked a question and it gave me a few answers, and then I asked another question, and this is what it came up with: a definitive timeline, no less, and regulatory analysis of broadcasting stations in Cottonwood and Sedona. So that's what we're going to wade into. The Verde Valley broadcast market, when we arrived here in 1979, was pretty much KVIO, and that was KVIO and CHASM. CHASM went on the air in 1974. It was a big part of the northern Arizona landscape, especially as it developed. A historical analysis of the licenses requires a little FCC data and a little technology, and I won't get into the technological aspects of it any more than I have to. But this history reflects the challenges and opportunities that were inherent in developing high-power signals across rugged, mountainous terrain, and that led to the technical and ownership profiles that we will talk about. Compared to metropolitan markets, we were kind of adapting very quickly to new technology and to the restrictions that we had on broadcasting because of our terrain. High effective radiated power and antenna height above average terrain are the measurements that we frequently associate with FM stations. That's why most of the FM stations around have antennas. They're broadcasting from the top of Mingus Mountain or from Mormon Mountain or from Mount Eldon. And particularly with FM is pretty much a line of sight signal. So if you're down in the bottom of a valley, you don't get very far, but if you're up on top of a mountain, your signal can go quite a long ways. And so as a result, the FM broadcasting as it developed here in the Verde Valley was nobody built any new AM stations. Everybody built new FM stations, and they wanted height above average terrain. We'll get to that with KVRD in a minute. As a result of people building new stations, bringing different stations under the same roof, Yavapai Broadcasting Corporation, of which Jackie is the general manager, Yavapai Broadcasting has become the dominant entity in local broadcasting. They have quite a portfolio. They bought KVRD and KVRD FM from us. They changed KVRD AM to KYBC for Yavapai Broadcasting. And they brought, when they bought us out in 1996, they already had a license to build KKLD, so that became the third property that they had, and now they have 6. It allowed them to kind of standardize their operations over different stations, to have a variety of formats, so that we don't go back to those AM days when it was country from 6 to 9 in the morning, and then it was rock and roll from 9 to noon, and whatever else. And then when the high school got out, they changed back to rock and roll in the afternoon. But anyway, they've been able to, KYBC, and Jackie will tell you much more about it because he knows, but they have been able to put together quite a group of stations, but still they grew from the original 2 stations, KVRD AM and FM, that they acquired here in 1996, and everything has still continued to be a local community interest kind of operation. By the way, these slides are going to be available if you want them later on, so you can tell. You can go back and look at the things that I skipped. The history of radio in Cottonwood begins with the licensing of an AM station, which, as I said, faced considerable technical limitations, and that's why we ended up switching over to, actually not switching over, but adding FM. Those AM stations are still here, they're still alive and well, and they're still operating as they had. So this was the daytimer era. 1964 was the oldest broadcast license in the area, and that was issued to a fellow by the name of Pete Viotti. A lot of you probably knew Pete. Pete's son Dino is sitting right here in the front row, and I called him and I said, hey, we're doing a history of radio. You want to talk about the station your dad put on the air in '64? He said, I was 2 years old when that happened. Huh? You weren't even born yet? Well, he was just a sparkle in Pete's eye, I guess, in those days. So he got this station going, and it was designed as, or designated as a daytimer. The FCC had decided that in order for small towns to be able to have radio stations, they were going to need some licenses to only work during the daytime. And that was because at night an AM signal will go a lot farther, it might interfere with other stations in the area or far away. As a matter of fact, to tell you how far an AM station signal can go, there was a DX report that went to KCRJ, the Jerome station, back in 1934. Someone from New Zealand, and there were people whose hobby it was to stay up late at night and find radio stations and document that they'd listen to them. So a person from New Zealand in 1934 sent a report to KCRJ in Jerome that they had listened to their signal, and they listed the time of day and the songs that were played so that that could verify that they were indeed listening to that station at that time. So, you know, a little AM station in Jerome, Arizona, if the weather's right, the time of day and everything else is right, their signal can actually be heard on the other side of the world. It was also a problem to be a daytimer. Right now, the sun is rising, I looked it up this morning, it was 6:56, so almost 7 o'clock. And it's going down about 5:30, I think, right now. So an AM station couldn't sign on in the morning this time of year until 7 o'clock. And they couldn't stay on the air after 5:30. Well, when you get into November, December, January, you have a short day to do your broadcasting. And when it comes to evening events like high school football games or live remotes from a bar in Prescott, right, Jackie? You can't do anything with an AM daytimer after those hours or before those hours. Yeah, and who's going to report us? But anyway, that was the daytimer era, and that was all we had. Chasm was a daytimer too. It was just us and KAZM in 1970 or 64, and actually Chasm didn't go until 74. So in those mid to late 70s, there were basically two stations here, and they both signed off at night. At one point, we got, just before we bought KVIO, we got, I think it was Dwayne Kirby, got what's called a pre-sunrise authority, so that they could sign on at 6 o'clock in the morning no matter when the sun came up, which just made a whole lot of sense because people don't want to wait until 7 or 7:30 to hear the weather forecast, you know? So that was a little bit of help, but it only amounted to a few hours or a few minutes, depending on the time of day. These are some documents that Dino found for me in his family's files. Of course, you know, their legacy, the family's legacy is a radio station, some shopping centers, and some residential and commercial developments. But one of the things that they did, I think, that was most exciting was that they applied for a permit to the Federal Communications Commission, and that's the item on the left of this screen. That was the first permit. Then they went on the air, and they began in 1964, I believe it was April 17th. One of the things that I found interesting about these articles is that one of them mentions a person who had worked at KVRD previously. I think it might be on the next slide. Let me look here. No, that's not it. Anyway, it named a person who had worked at KVRD previous to KVIO's licensing. And I have searched and searched and searched, and I cannot find a KVRD licensed before that. So I think that might have just been an error. Anyway, Arizona's newest radio station, KVIO, went on at 1600 on the AM dial. They had 1,000 watts. They covered the Verde Valley, Sedona, and it says here Prescott area. That was optimistic. Pete Viotti of Flagstaff and Cottonwood said the broadcast day would be, as I said, 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. And so that was a short broadcast day. But it was better than nothing, and they got it going. There is talk in this one article about how KVRD or KVIO was going to have two antennas. And two antennas, AM antennas, were only designed or only installed in facilities that were going to be directional. And the advantage of a directional signal was that you could shoot it out toward, let's say, Sedona or Flagstaff, but not interfere with somebody that had on a similar or adjacent frequency in Prescott, for instance. But as far as I know, KVIO was never directional. So maybe, the idea of the two towers may have been something that they tested, that it didn't work, and they ended up going with one tower, which was non-directional. That's what it was when we got there. Thanks to Dino for these clippings. Then, in 1966, KVIO was sold to Dwayne Kirby and his sister Violet, and they were KM Broadcasting. They bought it from Pete for a reported, is that $18,000 or $48,000? I think it's $18,000, which was a heck of a bargain, Pete didn't get enough money for that. But having owned an AM station, I can imagine why if you could sell it, you did. So Dwayne Kirby was the manager of KVIO up until the time that he bought it. He was one of several managers. And then he bought KVIO in 1996 and operated it until we bought it. Did I just lose? Oh, and operated it until we bought it from him in 1979. So in 1979, we bought KVIO and we changed the call letters to KVRD. And the regulatory transition from KVRD to KYBC. What does that mean? Well, in 1966, the call letters were reassigned to KYBC. That was when Yavapai Broadcasting bought KVRD FM and KVRD AM. They switched the AM letters to KYBC for Yavapai Broadcasting Corporation. They left KVRD FM designated as it was. And shortly after we put KVRD on the air back in the early 90s, it was the #1 rated station in Yavapai County. That country format was really a big hit. And one of the things you have to do before you are allowed to sign on or as part of the application process for a new radio station is that you have to do an assessment of the needs, problems, and interests of the community. And when we first came here to buy the AM, I went around town and tried to find out what the needs, problems, and interests were of Cottonwood in 1979. And that was an interesting thing. I figured, well, who am I going to talk to? So I went down to the Chamber of Commerce office in downtown Cottonwood, which wasn't very big. and I asked for a membership list, and there wasn't one. So I kind of made do and figured out who to talk to and who to ask, and got that bit of community survey done. And then one of the other things that I remember about going around the community before the launch of a radio station was when we were about to put KVRD FM on the air, we had determined from just popular demand that it was going to be a country music format. And I asked people, well, wait, you got calf country up there in Flagstaff, you know, you can listen to country music. They said, no, we need Cottonwood needs its own country music station. It was pretty much popular demand that determined our format. And before we signed on, about 3 weeks before we signed on, our first expansionary employee, Mark in the Morning, who Jackie will talk about a little bit later, Mark Bachman came to work for us before we got the FM on the air, but in anticipation that was going to be the case. And so he did a morning DJ show on the AM station until the FM signed on. And during those weeks before the sign-on, he and I went around town and we talked to sponsors, people who were sponsors of the AM station and people who weren't sponsors of the AM station and anybody that would listen to us. And we signed $50,000 worth of advertising contracts in 3 weeks in Cottonwood and the Verde Valley before that country station went on. So not only was the public looking forward to having a country station, but the advertisers were looking forward to having that outlet for their messages. The idea of linking call letters to areas or to corporations was one that was very popular back in those days. We had designated KVRD for, obviously, the Verde Valley, right? We wanted to tie our call letters to the community. And so that was how we got from KVIO to KVRD on the AM dial. KYBC today is still on that 1600 kilohertz, and its licensed nighttime power is reduced to 46 watts from 1,000 watts daytime. Jackie, check me on any of this that isn't accurate, because you're the guy there, and I'm depending on artificial intelligence here. So, due to those constraints, the modern strategy was FM translators. 96.3 is licensed to Cottonwood to mitigate the 24-hour urban coverage and terrain shadowing that plagues low-power AM stations here and elsewhere. So when we put KVRD on the air in 1991, it was, I don't think there was anything left of KSMK. Were they still there? Maybe? Yeah?
Yes,
okay.
For a small time,
Yeah,
yes.
for a little bit of time, but we were basically, we thought we were the only FM station around. And it really helped us a lot. Now, because of the FM station being full-time and full power full-time, we were able to do things like broadcast football games. This reel-to-reel over here is not the same one that we used for football games, but it's very similar. And since we couldn't broadcast at night, we would take this and go to the football game and do the play-by-play, the whole thing, you know, the announcements, this is sponsored by, just as if we were going to, you know, as if we were live. So we put a big reel of tape on here, tape the football game, come back from wherever it was, Globe or Miami, or we traveled with the team, and we'd take that tape, and Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, it'd be football time on KVRD AM. So those were the sort of things, once we had that ability to broadcast at night, we switched the sports to the FM, of course. This is a remote broadcast unit, circa 1960, but we still had it all the way through 1996. I'm going to tell you about this. This was high tech. As you can see on the back here, there are two red posts. And the way you worked this was you went into the broadcasting booth at the high school, or you went down to Village Furniture and did a live remote for them about their sale on Lazy Boys. And you went to the phone behind the desk and you unscrewed the hand or the microphone part of the phone, and there would be two contacts sticking out there. So you took a piece of wire and you put alligator clips on those two contacts, and then you connected the wires to these things, and you plugged microphones. That was it. Now, Jackie and Yavapai Broadcasting have this big truck full of equipment that they use when they're going on a live remote. But back in those days, this was the truck. This was all there was. So we would take that everywhere. And that was how things were done in those days. Now, of course, they have things like Marty's and transmitters that you can go to the remote area or the remote site and turn it on, and it sends a signal either back to the radio station or up to the mountain, and then it's rebroadcast on the main frequency. So those were the barriers that we were facing, and it wasn't just sports. Jackie Bessler, the hardest working man I ever saw, and the smartest too. He went over to Prescott, and he realized we had a really good signal over there on the other side of the mountain because we were on top. And he sold live remote shows to Big Mike's Palace Bar on Whiskey Row every Saturday night for, I don't know how long that lasted, years, 5 years. So every Saturday night you had the goings-on at Whiskey Row broadcast live over KVRD FM, and Jackie was there as the host of the broadcast. It was great. One time, Jackie needed to take Saturday night off, which was a very rare occasion. He showed up. So Krista and I, my wife's right there, Krista and I went over to Prescott, and we hosted Jackie's Saturday night broadcast, and Krista was helping the bartender give away prizes, and she was so short nobody could see her. So the bartender said, "Get up here." And there was my wife walking up and down the bar at Big Mike's Palace, handing out prizes or whatever it was she was doing, but it was amazing to see my wife get up on the bar. She was all dressed up like a cowgirl and all, with the boots and everything. I'll always remember that. Speaking of Krista, I think it's maybe going back a little bit on how we all got here and how we all got into the radio business. Krista and I met down in Safford, Arizona, where I was working for KATO Radio, and she was working at Town Hall, and of course I was doing news, so I went to Town Hall, and the town manager introduced me to Krista as his assistant, and we got to know each other, and we ended up deciding that we were going to get married, and that was partly because I wanted to buy a radio station and I needed a bookkeeper. And she was keeping the books for the city of Safford, so I figured, she ought to know how to do this. And so we got married on April 20th, 1979. And the next day, for our honeymoon, we came to Cottonwood, and we stayed for a few days at the Little Daisy Motel. which was the Ritz in Cottonwood back in 1979. And we looked for a place to live because we knew we were going to move here and we were going to take over the radio station. And we had 3 kids between the 2 of us already. So we came up here and stayed at the Little Daisy and found a house to rent, and then went back and got ready to move. And we moved up here, I think, about the 1st of May. We took over the radio station July 1st of 79, and we had it for 12 years. And I've talked about the difficulties having an AM daytime radio station in mountainous terrain and all that. Well, that was just the beginning of the difficulties. It was difficult to sell advertising enough to pay what we owed, let's just put it that way, and to have a payroll. And over the course of the 12 years that we owned that AM daytimer, which I used to call a one-lung AM daytimer, it gradually put us way into debt. We were getting poorer and poorer by the day, by the year, and having a hard time keeping the doors open and the lights on. So the obvious solution to that was, as has been pointed out by the report here, was to get an FM license. And so in the late 1980s, we applied for a license for KVRD FM. I found something in these all this material that said that KVRD had been KURD, Kurd radio, which would have been great maybe in Wisconsin, where you do the farm reports about every 15 minutes, but and cheese curds are a staple. But that, I don't know whether we put the wrong letters when we applied or the FCC made a mistake, but they issued a license for Kurd radio back in 1989. Very shortly after that, a matter of weeks, it was changed to KVRD. So somehow somebody realized the error of their ways and got it changed back. Before we could get our or our FM station on the air in '91, another group came in and they put an FM station on in August of '83, and it was KSMK-FM. Now, by '83, we had been here for 4 years, working our little tails off and trying to be respectable members of the community. But they immediately came to town and said they were going to run us out of business, which really didn't do them a lot of good because we had made friends and we had a fairly good reputation, and our station is still here and theirs has moved somewhere else. But that was, part of the deal was competition. And one of the things that I had been taught about selling radio advertising was that if you come across a person who says, well, I don't want to advertise on your station, I already advertise on the other station. You don't tell them they're stupid for doing that. You tell them you're glad they like radio. That's great, because your biggest competition isn't radio. Your biggest competition is the local newspaper. And of course, nowadays it would be online stuff and social media and all that. But back in those days, there were 2 places to advertise. It was on radio or on the local newspaper. And so we didn't badmouth other radio stations. We compared ourselves to the newspaper as far as their reach and the cost of advertising, and that turned out to be successful. But Jackie can tell you about the link between KSMK, KZGL, and KKLD. It's very complicated, and I still don't understand it. Let's see. Format volatility was one of the early things that, as I said earlier, some stations had 5 different formats in the course of a day. But the KSMK call signal was changed to KZGL, and there was an accompanying shift in format. And then they adopted another format in '96, and in '98, another one. So the current iteration began in 2006 when the station adopted KKLD, but by that time it was under the control of Yavapai Broadcasting. I will not try to explain all that. So KKLD was the license that Grant Halfley had when he bought us out, when he bought out KVRD from the KVRD Incorporated, which was Krista and me. And so KKLD was a station that he had already obtained the permits for, and shortly after he took over our operations, he put KKLD on. Would you buy advertising from that man? I don't think so. This was the article in the Independent when in July 15th of 1991, we put KVRD on the air. Now that was not only the arrival of our FM station, which was a huge, huge advantage over what we had, it was also the arrival of a couple of guys that made a big difference in our lives and in the Verde Valley broadcasting area. And that was Jackie Bessler, who came to work for us as a salesman and is now the general manager of everything in sight. I mentioned earlier Mark in the Morning, our morning DJ, and once he got on the FM, he took over. He was the greatest morning country DJ you ever heard. He established relationships with his audience. The other stations that we mentioned, KSMK, they were real proud of their morning duo. They had a man and a woman DJ their morning show. And I said, Mark, you're gonna have to carry this on your own. We don't have two disc jockeys to work in the morning. And he said, that's okay, I'm gonna make the audience my partner. And he did. Every morning he would be taking dedications. He'd pick up the phone, there'd be somebody calling from Prescott Valley or Chino Valley or Sedona or Camp Verde, and he knew their names, he knew what they were up to, and he'd ask them what they wanted to hear. And so he developed this personal relationship with the audience, and that was what made the difference. Jackie came in. I told him, we're going to have you sell some advertising. Well, it wasn't very long after that he brought a computer into the radio station. And I said, what are you going to do with that? And he said, you'll see. And he began to keep track of cash flow and future sales and future bills, and so we could actually see down the road a little ways about, are we going to make money in June or are we going to lose our tail in June? So we could actually, okay, we need to develop some promotions for that particular period of time because we don't have enough advertising sold in advance. Another person who was extremely important to the development of KVRD was, I'm going to look at the clock here to see how long I'm talking. Oh, I better shut up, Jackie. Marv Lundgren. Marv Lundgren, I don't know how many of you knew Marv, but Marv lived out in Cornville. He was the tech guy for the hospital, trying to get them to a place where they could keep track of their cash flow. And he came in the station one very cold February morning, and it was dark outside, and I was there by myself. And he said, are you still looking for money to build that FM station? And I said, you bet we are. And so he and his brother, Dave Lundgren from California, became our partners and helped us finance the construction of the AM station. And he was another one of the angels that saved our operation. That's it. Oh yeah, there's it where it says October 18th, 89, the initial call letters assigned were KURD, Kurd Radio. It might have been a hit, I don't know. But a month afterwards, it was changed to KVRD, so we were in good shape. It's currently operating just as it did then and doing a great job. And then we have Sedona. Chasm went on the air in 1974, and we had a gentleman who was going to come today to talk about Chasm, but for some reason he isn't able to be here today. So I'll just briefly say that Chasm was our main competitor when we came in 1979. It was owned by Joe Tabak. And Joe was a fellow that I would go visit with once in a while. When I was trying to sell advertising in Sedona, I'd stop at KAZM and just kind of go in and pick his brain, you know. And he was very nice and accommodating and always willing to give me a little advice. And he and his family owned it for 50 years. So there's a lot of stability in the broadcast spectrum here. Let's take, for instance, KVIO. Pete put KVIO on the air in '64. Kirby bought it. Viotti, Kirby, Dainerts, and Yavapai Broadcasting. That's 4 owners since 1964. So that's stable in the radio business. All right, I'm going to wrap this up real quick. And let Jackie take over because I've used most of his time already. These stories are very interesting. They'll be available to you online. And this kind of summarizes all the other things. This FM supremacy and mitigation strategy. FM was a mitigation strategy to begin with, and then it turned into the big dog on the block. I'm going to go past this real quick because I want to get to this before I stop. Gulch Radio, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but Gulch, yeah, a few hands up. Gulch Radio is a little station that's on 100.5 up in Jerome, and it was the dream of a couple of gentlemen. Chuck was one of them. I don't know his last name, but Richard Martin was one of them, and they tried to get a AM license, and they failed to do that. So they ended up getting an FM license in 2004, and they're still on the air. And I love their music format. We used to have an AM format called The Music of Your Life, which was when I was in my 30s, and our audience was mostly in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. So we were playing the music of their lives, not my life. Now, Gulch Radio is playing the music of my life, and I enjoy listening to it. Richard and Chuck did a great job. I invited Richard to come and join us today. I talked to him just about a week or two before he passed away, and he was not in good enough health to join us anyway, but sorry to hear that he passed. He did a great job for Jerome Radio, and it's a fun place. Okay, I'm not going to take questions until after Jackie's presentation, because Jackie's presentation is up now.
We do. All right, so I am Jackie Bessler with Yavapai Broadcasting, and it is my pleasure to be with you here today. I am going to pick it up here in 1996, January 1, 1996, and Yavapai Broadcasting takes over KVRD AM and FM. And the first thing that we do is we leave Mark in the morning on KVRD with the All Request Show, and he would be extremely popular without any problems whatsoever. KVRD AM would then turn to KYBC, and the music would change to a Great Memories station. Okay, and this would actually be something that Grant brought with him, this ideology brought with him from Cambridge, Ohio. So along these same lines, in fact, there's a whole list over here where Grant Halfley and his wife Pat were actually born in Tucson. They grew up in Tucson, and even as are you going to do a technical change here for me? Oh, perfect. This is Gianna. Everybody say hi, Gianna. Gianna is 100% in charge of everything technical because I don't have any idea of what I am doing. All right. Let's see. Do we do the slideshow?
It should.
Yeah.
But it looks a little different.
Lower right, down here.
bottom right. Okay, anyways, while we're doing this, so Grant grew up in Tucson. He actually had his own little radio station in his house. This was like the first internet radio. He literally ran speaker wires from house to house so that he could talk through people's radios through their neighborhood, which was absolutely phenomenal. I thought that was fantastic. So he would go on the air, he would talk about weather, he would talk about news, they would play a little bit of music, he would even read stories to children during the evening for evening time stories. It was absolutely fantastic for Old Town Radio. So Grant then, as he got older, went to Cambridge, Ohio, which is in the southeast corner of Ohio, and purchased WILE AM and FM. And then along with that, he grew those stations to 6 stations strong in Cambridge, Ohio, eventually selling them to AVC Communications, selling all of AVC Communications, which at current present moment has 8 total properties in Ohio. So, back to Arizona here. May 24th, 1996, KKLD 98.3 was born. Went on the air with our tower on the top of Mingus Mountain. Storm and Oldies came through Northern Arizona, actually licensed to Prescott Valley. Interesting fact, the KKLD call letters came from Tucson. So there was a station in Tucson that wanted to get KKLD out of the market. They didn't want anybody else to take those call letters and pretend to be them. So they gave those call letters to Grant. He brought them up here to Northern Arizona. So Grant brought his ideology of radio to the Cottonwood area, which was radio is based on people, and radio is based on community. So, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to deal with the people. Dave Kessel, our first general manager, a rich history in radio throughout the state of Arizona, from the Phoenix market all the way through Flagstaff, through Chasm and management. His on-air knowledge was just second to none. And he understood engineering to go along with it, which was absolutely wonderful. Gary Hershey was our first sales manager. Just absolutely the most optimistic person I have ever known in my entire life. He was well loved from Flagstaff through Prescott and the Verde Valley. And then, of course, the award-winning Paul David, probably the most iconic news name and voice through Northern Arizona. And we are just so happy that he continues to be a part of our organization here today. All right, so now we have KKLD on the air. And now we have people. Now we're going to go into community. So KVRD FM was already doing Mingus Marauder football. We did Bradshaw football on KKLD. Then we started all of these different things, from blood drives and car cruises to food drives that went throughout Northern Arizona. It started in Cottonwood and Prescott Valley. Now it's even expanded to the Coconino County market as well. So, for example, we have our Flying High Turkey Drive coming up Monday the 24th at a Fry's near you. You want to be a part of that. We just finished our Harvest to Feed the Hungry food drive, and across 4 locations, we collected nearly 5 tons of food in 6 hours. 5 tons of food in 6 hours. So this is about being part of your community out here. So Grant does not like grass. He obviously will not let any of it grow underneath his feet. He immediately started looking, how do we expand? And so what we did was we expanded into the Flagstaff market. Region Communication wasn't a huge corporation with radio stations, but they had radio stations in multiple markets throughout the nation. And this is the small fish actually coming to bite the bigger fish, is what it was. And Yavapai Broadcasting purchased Sunny 97, KZGL, and KVNA AM to take us from 3 stations to 6 stations. At this time, Gary Hershey retired from radio, and I took over as both the financial manager and the general sales manager. More important than the signals were the people that came along with this purchase. Rich Malone, who is such a talented individual, his voice and name just known through Northern Arizona decade after decade, and the ever-present Julie Page, probably one of the most loved DJs here through Northern Arizona. She came with the deal as well. Now, interesting fact, these two were not married when they got to us, but they did marry while they were with Yavapai Broadcasting, and they were the second married couple that would work with Yavapai Broadcasting. Our first being Kevin and Candace Resco, who were in charge of our traffic department for years and years. So, interesting piece of information there. So, now we have expanded. We've gone into a new market. We've more than doubled in size. We've gone from 3 stations to 6 stations. I've got all these people that I don't even know that we are now in charge of. And little history about KZGL. You were talking about KZGL, KSMK, KISS FM. It was Krieger and the Wolf was their morning show. And at some particular point, they became part of the Regent Group and moved up to the Flagstaff market and out of the Cottonwood market. So we have all of these things together. And then came the possibility of Y2K. Everybody remember what was going to happen? It was going to go from 1999 to 2000. All computers were going to stop. The grid was going to stop. Yeah, you remember all that. Planes will fall out of the air? And I thought you said brains will fall. Okay. So we were prepared because at this particular point, we were pretty much dependent upon computers throughout our stations in regards to music and presentation. So we had a secondary plan. We had a small FM transmitter and an antenna attached to our KYBC tower here in Cottonwood and ready to go on the air with a generator on 105.7 in the event that the power went down and we needed to have emergency services here for our community. So we went through all of that process to get that ready. Whew, thank goodness it did not happen. Then, shortly after that, in the early 2000s, came the FCC. You see the radio police? Yes, okay. So the FCC came up with this brilliant idea, as most government entities do, right? And they came up with the idea that there needed to be more different formats on the air. There needed to be more options for listeners and everything else. So what they started to do to kind of force that to happen is they went around the nation and started selling frequencies. They would do auctions for frequencies. And what am I talking about? Okay, so there's no frequency available right now in Ash Fork, Arizona. Okay, let's make a frequency available there that fits and doesn't disrupt anybody else. Okay, so somebody would buy that and go, I don't want to work in Ash Fork. How about I move that to Prescott and still cover Ash Fork, but I'll be a Prescott radio station. And so the great move-in game began. Okay, oops, what did I do? Great move-in game began. 2 of our signals would leave Yavapai Broadcasting, would go south to the Phoenix market. The first was 97.5, Sunny 97. It was licensed in broadcasting from the Flagstaff area. They changed the city of license to Mayer and brought the tower down south of Mayer so that it could point into Phoenix. Did it still cover Mayer? Yep, they don't care. It was going to be a Phoenix radio station. That was the first of 2 that would move. The second would actually be 98.3. The problem was that that's where KKLD was. So we had to make a choice here. So the choice was KZGL for a very brief time moved to 98.3 and then moved to Phoenix, and then that active rock format disappeared from our area. And KKLD became the new 95.9 KKLD. So all of this is going on during this period. This becomes the most difficult period of time in life. During this time, we are still operating out of our old building here. And this is between what was Reese's Tire and is Denny's, right? That is our tower. The bottom picture over here on the right, we had a single-wide business trailer there. And that's where I worked for years and years, right up underneath that AM tower. KZGL, KVNA, AM, and FM were still operating out of building in Phoenix. So now, after all those years of operating under that tower, I started to think here. Was it all the changes where I kept changing hats that created this fabulous haircut that I have? Or was it under the AM tower? So I went to some of my cohorts. This is Mike Jensen and Brian James, who work for Yavapai Broadcasting, and I asked them, is it just changing hats, or is it AM radio waves that causes this beautiful hair design? Richard, do you want to weigh in on this at all?
Well,
what do you think?
I was bald before I got here, so I don't think that's it.
All right. Okay, so apparently it is not AM radio waves that causes male pattern baldness, but nonetheless. So While we were going through this, we've got 2 stations that are now moving to the Phoenix market. Believe it or not, at one particular point, I don't know how, I was actually working with 8 radio stations, okay, because we had brought in KQST and KLOD. We went to Rocket Radio and we purchased KQST, which originated and licensed to Sedona, but operating out of Flagstaff. Remember how that works, right? Operating out of Mormon Mountain in Flagstaff. And then the KLOD, which was, that changed formats like 6 times in 3 years. And then when it got to us, it became the new home of Sunny 100. Rich Malone found a new place to be back on the air. Meanwhile, while we are going all through this, why don't we go ahead and build a new building, since we've got nothing else going? This is exactly what we did, our new building just east of the Verde River Bridge. Grant Hafley actually personally wired and engineered that entire building, okay, which is phenomenal. So much so. In fact, you see Becca here, your friend Becca. There's Becca. Becca is afternoons on the all-new Peak and is also part of the morning show on the Q, and she is showing off one of our studios. This studio is actually not too horribly different than the way it was in 2005. Those boards can actually run 4 FMs in an emergency situation out of just one studio. So we are wired in such a way that we have all sorts of duplication over and over again. That was an engineer getting in charge of a building. Indeed. All right. So we have this going, and then at the same time, we start Studio G. Studio G Productions, you probably know it as Verde Valley TV. You can probably watch this broadcast on Verde Valley TV, our YouTube channel, and Cablecast channel as well. A couple of pictures of our studio. We can do talking head programs. We have the chamber chat that comes in and talks. We do the Cottonwood Chamber Council meetings. We also will do Mingus Marauder Sports and travel with them wherever we go out of that giant box truck that we were talking about. And on top of that, oh shoot, you know, what else do we? Oh, we even do Cottonwood Christmas parades, which this year's Cottonwood Christmas parade, because of all of the construction that will go on in Cottonwood, means that it will be a stationary parade, and it will be at the Verde Valley Fairgrounds. Shameless promotion for the Greater Verde Valley Chamber of Commerce. That's what we do in radio anyways. Okay, so we have our video production that is underway. So pretty much at this point, we get to 2006. We have built our buildings. We have created, we've got as many radio stations as we can do. We've really got no more chess moves on the board to make at this point. Mike Pitts finally comes along, thank goodness, and becomes our general sales manager in 2006. We have great years in 2006, 2007, and then you remember what happened in 2008. The recession hit, and it hit Arizona extremely difficult, and even northern Arizona very hard, because we were so dependent upon building, and the construction industry went to near zero at that point. It was really hard on radio. So then we turn around from that, Trey coming back, and during the course of it, we have this long period of stability, and then these things like retirements start happening in our organization. All right, so in 2013, John Herring, who was the morning jock on KQST, he decides to retire, giving Brian James an opportunity. And so Brian James, who started with us in 1999 as a Mingus High School student, doing roadie work, going around to remotes and setting up speakers and stuff like that. In 2013, he becomes the program director of one of the biggest stations here in northern Arizona. Brad Miller is in attendance here. There we go. Yes, give him a round of applause. The Bear himself takes over KVRD in 2014 as our beloved Mark in the Morning does retire. And I am going to tell you one thing about Mark in the Morning. We have all this technology. All of the music was in the computer that was just to his left. Not once did he ever use it. During his entire career, he used CDs, and that was high tech for him. He used CDs all the way through his entire career. He could tell you where a song was, on what CD, what number, and what box. It was unbelievable. Okay, he could remember everything, but the man could not remember to eat lunch. I kid you not. He can remember everybody's name, but. So we have these changes going on, and then we have 2016 comes along. Actually, 2015 comes along first, and Sunny 100 KVNA FM goes to Arizona Adults Alternative. This was an interesting move. This was a brainchild of Rich Malone and a nationally renowned broadcaster by the name of Dennis Constantine. This was an extremely unique format that was eclectic and very deep. So it did different genres of music all under one, and it was a really unique idea. It went on the air on New Year's Eve 2015, and then 2016 we start and we go on with different changes. So Mike Pitts worked with us until 2013 as our general sales manager, left and went to go do a gig in Yuma as a general manager. He came back in 2016 to take over the general manager position because Dave Kessel decided to end his illustrious career in radio after so many years, and he would then retire in 2016. We would have other people would also retire from 2016 through today. Candace Ruska retired. Lisa Ellers, as well as Cheryl Duke, some names through the area. The ever-present Don Passerby. Some people might even remember Don Passerby in the Verde Valley area as well, all coming to retirements. But before all of that, we run into 2020. Anybody remember that year? Yes, COVID. So I don't know how this affected radio stations in other areas. I can tell you how it affected us. We are so involved in our community, it really came very apparent that 40, 45, 50, some months, even 60% of what we do is attached to events. Whether it's a rodeo, whether it's a concert, whether it's a blood drive, a food drive, it really doesn't matter. So many things that we do are attached to events, so you can see what happened to our revenue when the government said that we were not allowed to participate with events. That was definitely painful. All right, we can't get through 2020 and start to climb back up 22, 23, and then in 2024, Mike Pitts decides that he is going to change jobs. He's not going to be the general manager of a radio station anymore. He's going to do a full-time job as grandpa. And he is going to change states to get it done. We bring in Mike Jensen, our newest general sales manager, and he's actually holding an award from the Hall of Fame Nevada Broadcasters, which is absolutely phenomenal. He brings all sorts of energy and insight from all sorts of different markets to Yavapai Broadcasting. And in the process, in his first full year of being our general sales manager, we are nearly back to pre-COVID numbers, which is quite a feat. He has also taken Yavapai Broadcasting to a different direction. And one of that is being able to do and create websites, bringing in people who can work on websites and social media, etc., and bringing us to a whole different level. So how is radio consumed nowadays as opposed to so many years ago? Well, there are so many different ways to consume radio now. You can do it via your computer. You can do it via your phone. Most of our listenership, I believe, is still working off of traditional radio and still listens in their vehicle, in their home, in their garage, whatever the case is. But people now have choices where they can pick up our apps and they can listen on their phone wherever they are. You can listen online from different states if you wish. You can move out of state and still take KVRD with you, however you want to do that. So there are so many different varieties of ways that people can still consume radio. And, just like you used to get milk delivered to your door, well, now you still drink milk, but you go to the store and pick it up, right? So it's just a different way of consuming. Most recently, we had another retirement out here, and the retirement was Julie Page. Julie Page would retire from Yavapai Broadcasting and Radio, and in the process, the Arizona Adult Alternative station in that format would come to a close. Now, the new peak, 100.1 for 80s, 90s, and now that is our most recent change here to formats and to logos and all of that fun stuff. So that pretty much brings you up to date with Yavapai Broadcasting from 96 through today.
Thank you, Rick and Jackie. Are there any questions?
I just wanted to mention that I seem to remember that there was a KVRD before KVIO. Could there have been a local broadcaster that put on radio before KVIO came on?
I couldn't find any record of that. It's, you know, we looked at FCC files and we did
Yeah.
you know, had the artificial intelligence generate
Right.
this history, and there was never a previous KVRD. The only mention of a previous KVRD was in the newspaper article that Pete had in the local paper when they put KVIO on the air, and it said that Eric Tabling was going to work for them and had previously worked at KVRD in Cottonwood, but I don't know what that was. I have no idea.
Yeah, I remember Eric on the radio.
Yeah.
And Joe Adams, who actually made a career of radio in Phoenix after he was a disc jockey here for KVIO. And by the way, when Dwayne Kirby was managing KVIO, he had a Miss KVIO contest.
And you won.
I was second place in 1967. What can I say? You know, what's the taste in this country? You know?
The winner must have been an unreal beauty. Oh, popularity. Oh, okay.
Phil, did you have a question? Whoop. Redo it.
You talked about the history and how we got to today, and then you talked about artificial intelligence, and I'm just thinking, I look down at my phone and they're telling us now that the cell phone towers are going to go away because we're switching now to Wi-Fi driven cellular phones. What's your crystal ball says happening in the industry? Where are we headed?
Well, I would say first of all we'll have more bald people, if just a guess. So you know, obviously the technology is going to continue to change, but the number one thing that we're dealing with here, Phil, is the fact that there is limited space on the overall frequency bar. Okay, and so FM frequencies have this piece. You've got the military that has this piece. The FAA will have their piece. AM has their piece, and there's just limited space on that broadband. And more of the cell towers and the cell companies are eating more and more of that available broadband. So whether or not that is going to go to a Wi-Fi situation in order to encompass a greater demand is going to be a very interesting concept. But whether or not that field actually frees up broadband or space, I'm not 100% sure. There's no doubts that they're continuing to put towers on. We're 4G, we're 5G. I'm sure they have plans for 8G that are, you know, not too far in the future. But, you know, where that's going to be spaced on the dial, I do not know. So one of the things that I was talking about with the FCC when in the early 2000s, when they started putting all these additional radio stations on the air to create more formats, right? First of all, it failed miserably. What you ended up with in the Phoenix area was 6 country stations and 6 urban stations and 9 Hispanic stations. It just everybody conglomerated back to the formats that were broad enough that they could sell advertising on those formats. The niche formats just never worked. But what they did was they filled the dial. And in the process of doing so, they took over spaces that police and fire were actually using on the dial in certain areas, especially rural areas like us. And they had to find new places to go for their own communications because the spaces on the dial were getting eaten up. So broadband is certainly going to be something that's going to play that role.
I want to just make a comment about allocations of frequencies and space on the dial and that sort of thing. And you know, like everybody, it's easy to make jokes about the government and that, the government always does everything wrong. But I have to say, on behalf of being an old broadcaster, that in 1927, the federal government established the Radio Commission. And in 1934, they passed the Federal Communications Act, which created the Federal Communications Commission and its regulatory powers. And one of the most important thing, probably, other than outlawing the 7 deadly words that George Carlin kept wanting to say,
Right.
but one of the most important things that the government did, that the Federal Communications Commission did, was allocate frequencies. If everybody had been able to put on a radio station anywhere they wanted to put it, you wouldn't be able to hear any of them. They would all be interfering with each other, and it would be noise. But the fact that they meticulously went through, and when you applied for 105.7, which was KVRD in Cottonwood, you had to have an engineer prove that at that frequency, at that height above average terrain, at that power, it wasn't going to interfere with another station. And so sure, it was a pain in the neck, it was expensive, but it protected those people who already had licenses from being interfered with. So to me, that's one of the areas where, if we hadn't had government regulation, we wouldn't have been able to have the industry that we ended up with as far as broadcasting is concerned.
In fact, when you hear at the top of the hour, every radio station is required to do a legal ID and indicate what their call letters are and where they're located. And that is specifically in case you are interfering with another radio station, that they don't have to go more than an hour to figure out who you are and where you are. So that is indeed why they do those legal IDs at the top of the hour.
Mike, do we have to say goodbye? Okay. At one point, when we had KVRD on the air, there was somebody over in the Prescott Valley area or Dewey or someplace like that had a little pirate. It was like, they called it a community radio station, but it was a pirate station. And it was interfering with our signal. And so we had to go to the FCC and make sure that the regulations were enforced so that we didn't have pirate stations jumping up out of nowhere.
Any other questions out there?
What's a pirate station?
What is a pirate station? That is a station that will actually broadcast the Pittsburgh Pirates. And so a pirate radio station is a station that is actually broadcasting that doesn't have a license to broadcast. And so even through the Verde Valley, there have been stations that have operated on a frequency until they actually got a low-powered license to operate. But they're very common throughout the nation. And there are even pirate radio stations that go to international waters where you can't control it and will put a signal on the air and will compete with radio stations on coastal areas as well.
That was a big thing in England years ago, was the BBC didn't want to have any competition, but they couldn't stop people from having ships parked offshore in international waters with great, big, powerful radio stations on board so that they could cover all of England without having a license to broadcast in England.
Yes, sir.
How big was the audience when Pete started the radio station compared to the audience today that you have for your station?
How big is the population of the Verde Valley versus today? So, obviously, the size of the community going back so many decades ago, considerably smaller, and we have gone through tremendous increases through the Verde Valley and the Prescott Valley area. In fact, Prescott Valley has a bigger population now than Prescott itself. Okay, but that kind of growth here in northern Arizona has only added to the actual overall reach of any of these radio stations. Throughout Yavapai County, yeah. Well, when you take Yavapai County and Coconino County and you put them together, you're well above that. Flagstaff by itself is a metro market with more than 100,000 people just in and of itself. And then you've got more than 200,000 through Yavapai County by itself. So that kind of a reach is extremely important. At one particular point, Arbitron, who rated radio stations, now purchased out by Nielsen, okay, took Yavapai County and Coconino County and put them together to make one market, which was foolish, okay? One market should be one kind of a consumer market as opposed to so far spread out. They basically said that our area was market 158 or 148, but we were bigger than the state of Rhode Island, really. And Rhode Island is one market, seriously? 6 states. We're bigger than 6 states? Well, then if we add in Coconino County, we were probably bigger than 8 states. I don't know. So that just seemed always really interesting to me, and it didn't seem right. I'm going to get up in the morning. I'm going to go ahead and drive to Ash Fork and pick up my coffee, and then I'm going to drive to work in Prescott. And you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. But definitely, the population will control what kind of reach the radio stations will have, because any particular radio station, you take at one point when CAF was all by itself, when CAF was the country opportunity in northern Arizona, CAF probably had a 20, 25, 30 share of Coconino County and Yavapai County. They were rated as one of the top small market radio stations in the nation, winning award after award after award after award. It was absolutely phenomenal, and that's what we were competing with when we first started and put KVRD on the air. But obviously, as you add radio stations, everybody's going to take their piece, and loading the dial in communities is, to me, the biggest competition for radio through the years has been radio. When there were 6 of us, now there's 18 of us. Everybody's going to take their piece, and it's just going to be a little bit harder.
You know, and there's so many, as Jackie was saying earlier, there are so many ways for people to get their news and entertainment. You got Spotify, you got satellite radio, you got all these other ways that people can consume the information and the entertainment, that it's anybody's guess how many people are listening to one particular radio station at a time. And didn't you say that the rating agencies were trying to extort the radio stations to pay them all a lot of money to continue the survey?
Oh yeah, they wanted $100,000 for every group. And so they wanted $300,000 to do 400 surveys a year. Not a very good idea. But along those same lines, even though Spotify exists today, before Spotify, what was Spotify before Spotify? It was what? I have no idea what that is. But even going back further, okay, Spotify was CDs. Spotify was 8-tracks, was albums. Spotify was any way that somebody could get music to their own personal preferences, and they had their own group. They had their own, library of music. Spotify is just a digital version of all of the CDs that we used to have, in our vehicle, okay? And that was just listening to what we wanted to listen to when we wanted to. So radio has always had that competition. That's not new competition to us in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you all for coming out today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the Historical Society for hosting this event. And we'll see you around.
Thank you, Richard and Jackie and Dino, for being here. And if you'd like, please come up and take a look at the equipment that was brought in. It's really interesting. Thank you.